You are now tuned into the SoCHiology podcast. SoCHiology is a lifestyle brand that analyzes Chicago culture and connected topics abroad, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. In 2008, I was a junior in college, and it was the very first presidential election I was eligible to vote in. And of course, I voted for Barack Obama, a Chicago Titan, just like MJ, Oprah, all of them. America's first black American president, of course, it's only right that his presidential library would be in Chicago, where he got his start, right? It don't need to be anywhere else. But the problem isn't with the Obama Presidential Library itself, it's the location. That's what causes concerns for a lot of residents and for a lot of activists. On this episode of SoCHiology, I'm going to talk with two gentlemen who are very much intricate in the know-how with what's going on. One of them is Michael Rackless. He's the co-counselor for Protect Our Parks, who is the main plaintiff in this case. And then another one is Graham Balcony, who's an architect of over 20 years. Both of these gentlemen are going to educate us on why Jackson Park isn't the most ideal location for the Obama Presidential Library. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so Michael, can you very briefly explain to us the mission of Protect Our Parks, and when did the entire, lawsuit, civil suit, whatever it is that is called, begin? Can you walk us through all of that, in a summarized version? Because I read over some of the documents and it's long. But what is Protect Our Parks?
Okay, starting there. So Protect Our Parks is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization with a mission of protecting parks in our city, all over the city. They were founded, I believe, in 2007 and have spent a lot of time doing advocacy in order to protect the parks for the communities that utilize them and for the city and for the future and their future usage. So their work in Jackson Park is very consistent with the goals and mission for the organization. And, that takes and that dives in, pretty much with the lawsuit that was filed, which I'm happy to give you a thumbnail sketch of. So just so you know, the suit itself is not just involved Protect Our Parks, but in fact, it has many individual plaintiffs that are from the neighborhood around the Obama Presidential Center. There are people that live in South Shore, plaintiff Bren Sheriff, Sid Williams, Sharif, I apologize. Yes, both live in South Shore. Jamie Calvin lives on the south side in the Hyde Park area. Tom Mitchell lives in the Hyde Park area. Stephanie Franklin lives within a few blocks of Jackson Park and is what was the president of the Nichols Park Advisory Council. So all of the plaintiffs here have interest in and work in and basically are either have interest in or live, for the most part, live in the area that's impacted. So it's very close to their hearts in terms of what's going on. And basically the suit itself involves challenges. They derive from challenges to the federal review process that was ongoing once the city and the foundation had chosen Jackson Park as the site for the Obama Presidential Center, which was back in 2016. And those federal reviews, which involved various statutes that are well recognized and have great public policy aspects to it. They're designed to protect the environment, to protect not the human environment, the wildlife environment, the natural environment. They're designed to protect parkland. They're designed to protect historic resources. Those were the types of reviews that were triggered back in 2017 by the placement of in Jackson Park and concluded in the latter part of 2021. I'm sorry, not in the latter, in February of 2021, my apologies. So there are numerous problems and issues that the plaintiffs believe arose from the manner in which those federal reviews were conducted and the rationales and reasons that they provided for ultimately giving their okays. to the Obama Presidential Center going forward, as suggested. And there are other state law claims as well. Jackson Park is well recognized as having a unique status as public trust property, which provides its protections like other parks. This is commonly discussed in the lake, along the lakefront, but there are other protections as well. There are important constitutional questions, state law constitutional questions, in terms of whether or not the city gave up its authority to really review and site select, and abdicated that authority to a private party. And the Obama Foundation is a private party, a private entity. Whether it's a not-for-profit doesn't change its status as a private developer in this context. So the suit also raises questions and issues associated with those very important issues I would say under Illinois law, and when you're dealing with these types of developments. So I hope that answers in a very broad way what the current suit is about.
It does. It does. A lot of valuable information there. So I live in South Shore. I'm a resident of South Shore currently. And it doesn't take me long to travel to where the site of the Obama Library will be, whatever context we're using here. The trees have been cut down and construction has started. Where is the current litigation now in regards to this matter?
Okay, so we prior to the start of construction, of course, our suit was filed in April, and we had requested a preliminary injunction asking the court to basically halt material construction, whether it involved tearing up of roads, whether it involved destruction of the trees, the natural environment, and things of that nature. We had asked basically for that to be put in abeyance while the court had an opportunity to look at the merits, all the merits of the entirety of the suit. That injunction request was denied in early August. The plaintiffs then are in the process of appealing that. They've taken many steps, including filing motions to stay, basically to stay while these appeals were pending in the higher court, which is the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. This is a federal court action. So we've gone to the Seventh Circuit. We did not succeed in getting a stay pending appeal. We also went to the U.S. Supreme Court, where there still is a motion, an application for an injunction pending appeal that is currently actually pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. So we have taken every possible step in an effort to try and keep the status quo in place. And in the meantime, we are appealing the denial of the preliminary injunction, and we believe that there's certainly much to be saved. Clearly there's disappointment in the fact that several of the trees in the 19.3 area acres where the Obama Presidential Center is going to be placed, have been cut down. We recognize that, but there are a lot more trees that are being threatened in the park, and the roads remain. While there are traffic shifts and there are temporary sawhorses in place, they have not been torn up, and so there's still much to protect, and we are working very hard in an effort to try and preserve those elements, because we certainly think that the park itself can be still protected. And I think Graham could probably talk about this further too. There's much there that is still at risk and has not been impacted. And so our efforts right now continue to be to get a stay in place, and then continue to proceed with having the trial court look at the merits of our case.
Wow. So you telling me it's still more that will be impacted and uprooted? Because it seems like they already did a lot,
No, there's definitely a lot more. This is, and it's easy to, when you think about it, and it's like I say, it's very. We're certainly, it's disheartening. Clearly, when you're believe that this park, which is such an important community asset, loses some of these mature trees. One of our plaintiffs, Tom Mitchell, is an expert on Olmsted landscapes, including Jackson Park, and he has spoken very eloquently about the historic growth and the maturity of this park as it currently exists. And we certainly think that those elements still remain, and we want to protect them. So there's much to do, in whether those be the further tree work, whether it be the roads. Graham also is very well versed in these issues and can further talk about how those can be protected when you think about alternatives and things of that nature. So yes, there's there's more to lose and there's more to gain as we are trying to, in terms of what we're trying to protect.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick, Twiz, and add to what Michael's saying. I mean, when all is said and done, they're talking about construction for 5 years here, potentially more. When all is said and done, there is very, very little of Jackson Park that you will recognize. It's really quite tragic, and because we're talking about an additional close to 400 trees that are definite that will be killed for the road work. And there's most likely several hundred more trees because they're talking about reconfiguring the golf course. We're talking about widening bridges. We're talking about all the construction traffic that goes into this, where they need staging and they need areas to clear land. It's devastating, quite frankly. And there are tree studies out there linked on our website and available just on the internet if you Google for it. But this has all been very clearly marked out, almost like you would imagine the strategy for a war. Every little piece is on that chessboard in play. All the species are documented, and it's really interesting to look at this because Olmsted, the landscape architect, was clearly he's considered a national hero, like a treasure, and he's considered the forefather of all of the landscape movement in this country and beyond. The vision he had in terms of the diversity of the plant material he used, and in particular, what appeals to me are the native species. He was using, saying these are indigenous to this place and they have beauty, even though they may not be traditional in landscape architecture. Meaning, in other words, they're not European imports, parts of colonialization, basically. He was looking beyond that. And I'm just trying to make a point when you look at what's there now, that's a result of his hand. And these really, really special plantings that are not widely available in the landscape trade. If everything that we're talking about today comes to fruition, what you will see 50 to 80 years from now is that the vision we have today does not match what Olmsted did. The plant material that they're using is very limited. It's rather mundane, and it does not properly even come close to restoring what's there currently. So I just wanted to make that point. And if there's any ambiguity there, our website definitely talks about it further.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're it's all right. Graham, so you're an architect, and I looked at your alternative for the Obama Library. Can you give our listeners a rough draft, an overview of your alternative plan on where the Obama Library could have been and how it could have benefited the communities?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Thank you for taking a look at it. I hope everybody takes a look at it because, Michael's clearly got the legal side of this covered, and there are very important arguments there about precedent and about the law and nature and what's going on here that are really very egregious. But I kind of come from a shovels in the ground, nuts and bolts place as an architect, and the way I look at this is, I think 99.99% of Southsiders and Chicagoans are eager to have the Obama Library. There's no doubt about it. I think the vast majority of people on the South Side would also agree that there's a lot of opportunity to put this in a place where we don't do damage. You'd have to have a blindfold on your whole life to not realize there's vacant land, disinvestment, disparity, underserved communities all around us. I think we can all agree that that's true. And the question I raise is, how can we maximize this investment? This is $1 billion. We're talking, that's the current projection. It's probably going to be more than that when it's all done. We're talking $170 million of public money. We're talking $830 million of donor money. A lot of that's presumably coming from outside of Chicago. That's free money in the way. And the question is, how can we make that investment in a way that, number one, makes the most sense, number two, does the least harm, and number three, continues to pay dividends, return on investment, so that we can revitalize something for posterity and really change the course of how the South Side behaves. So I know that's a highfalutin answer, but that was the premise that drove this whole idea. Is like, wait a second, if the South Side needs help, why are we taking out something so beautiful and really setting ourselves back before we even get started? That doesn't make any sense. So the plan that I've been working on, what I've tried to do is to identify all the the stakeholders, so to speak. And number one, I live on the South Side. Actually, I'm not far from you, Twist. The first stakeholder are the people who have stayed here and lived here, raised their children here. I think we matter. I think the community matters, right?
Yes.
The second stakeholder is naturally the legacy of our first Black president. And that is enormous, right? I mean, that can't be understated. The third stakeholder is the foundation and the people who actually operate this thing. The fourth stakeholder is the University of Chicago, because they're a sponsor. And then there's a fifth thing here, which is really important, I think, which is what I call the environment. And that is the natural environment, and it's the historical context of our city that makes Chicago special, that brings tourists here. That's the golden goose that we haven't really, worked into this equation very well. So you take all those stakeholders and, what's a way that we can satisfy everybody? That's what I've tried to do. And, you can't please everyone. But, I've tried to create a plan that is sensitive to people, sensitive to nature, sensitive, yes, to the needs of the Obama Foundation and this facility. And what we've done is we've placed it on vacant land, which is just to the west of Washington Park. So that's basically contiguous with the same green space that they're currently invading. But we've placed it there on vacant land. We've actually grown the amount of public parkland is rather than intruding upon it. We've created something that's net zero, or at least has the possibility to be net zero, whereas their current plans do not even come close. And we've done that in a way that's focused around the CTA Green Line, where we can get people out of their cars, and activate this area. Mass transit goes two ways, right? So we can have people get, doing what's right for the environment by making better use of mass transit, but we can also use that as a way, as a conduit, a mechanism to bring people into the South Side, show them what we've got to offer, grow the economy, spread that wealth around a little bit, bridge racial divisions. This is serious stuff that we can accomplish, but we've got to strategically place this thing in a place where it matters and where the community can really benefit. So that's what the plan's all about. I know that was a long answer.
No, it was a long answer, but it was a necessary answer.
Can I add a couple of things that Graham,
I think
are important on just the thoughtfulness and sort of the integrity of the plan itself. One thing, a couple of things to note, in addition to the Green Line, it uses natural transportation routes that are currently in place, which I think are very important, because when you juxtapose that area with trying to squeeze in something that really doesn't have any natural access, it will come out later. I mean, it really hasn't been thought through, and Graham can talk about this much more eloquently than I can, but it is clear that getting in and out of what's going to be the proposed center, Jackson Park, is going to be nightmarish in many different ways. And not just for people using it, but for people, deliveries. And when you put on top of that the security interests that are going to be necessary, and its implications, but I mean, that in itself is problematic. Put the implications about taking what is a public area and then basically depublicizing it, really, because you're going to have such protections and issues associated with security. There's going to be so many problems there. In the area that Graham has thoughtfully thought about, you can deal with these issues in a much better way, and importantly, actually enhance the transportation issues that are presently there. And beside all that, and I don't know if it was clear enough, but it's important. The ability to have true economic development in that area is really actually exists, and exists in an area that's actually underserved. That you can't really have economic development in the middle of a park, putting aside whether, you know, the uniqueness of having this historic resource and its import to the community and its import generally is the most used South Side park. Putting all that aside, it's very difficult to be able to start building true businesses or buildings or other things. You actually can't. I mean, there are preclusions about doing that in a public park, in a public trust park. So it becomes extraordinarily difficult. And those things are unfortunately sort of ignored. But when you have a thoughtful plan like this in an area that allows it and has been underserved, you really are going to get a chance to both complement what's there and develop it in a much more, in a real sustainable way. So anyway, I just wasn't sure that was as clear from what, Graham, you were saying, but as an overview, I think those are very important points as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Graham.
No, go for it, because we're gonna, you know, you were speculating maybe an hour top. So Michael and I will take you out into the evening, man. You know, so but I just wanted to say, you know, everything Michael said is spot on, and we got to think too, if the foundation is to flourish, you know, when we want it to flourish, all these things impact them too. You know, logistical issues, transportation issues, potential conflict with the community as they try and do things, or even just very basic matters like, okay, let's say this thing takes off and they don't have enough office space. Yep. Where's the available space to do anything else?
Yeah.
It's just when you build something in a park like this, you've locked yourself into a corner. You painted yourself into a corner, and now, I have reservations. I think that they've sold themselves short in many ways. We can talk about that later if we've got time, if it interests you.
So like I said, I looked at the plan, and I'll add the link to the bio of this episode so viewers and listeners can look at it. But so like you said, it's on vacant lot, and all of that space. And I drove by it. Yeah, it's just sitting there. It's just sitting there, just untouched, just waiting for something to happen. Whereas, so you look at Jackson Park, and to Michael's point, the transportation nightmare. So you got that elementary school over there, Bret Hart Elementary. You have people that's picking up the students there, dropping the students off. But then you want to take away Cornell Drive. And I'm going to be honest, like that was one of the first things that hit us. So it's not like being insensitive to the park itself, because of course, the environment, the trees, disrupting the habitat of all the birds and animals. That's a real thing. Just as a human, the first thing that struck me was you're taking away one of the main arteries that runs through the park. Like you're literally taking it away. Cornell Drive, that 4-block stretch of Cornell Drive. Then you're taking away Marquette, east of Stony. So you're taking away 2 roads that are heavily utilized throughout the park that flows to traffic. And now you're just leaving Lakeshore Drive to the east and Stony Island to the west. That's a nightmare. And it's already a nightmare. Like I said, we're already feeling the effects of it now during the construction. And I read something, it's like a traffic study that the foundation had put out and said that taking away Cornell Drive is going to just add 1 to 3 minutes max to the commute. Clearly, they don't live in Chicago. They don't live in Chicago. They really think taking away Cornell Drive is going to add 1 to 3 minute extra to your commute.
We could not agree. I mean, look, we agree with that. I mean, that traffic study, one of the analysis that is being challenged in the suit involved that study done under the Transportation Act. And those studies that you've identified were part of the work done in order to support some of their conclusions. And it is, many of us who are the plaintiffs, Graham, others who either live or work in the area have commented very similarly to as you've just said. And we believe the community, I think that part of it's difficult here because when you're talking about a project, you don't feel it, right? I mean, there's something that, listen, this is going to happen 2 years from now or whatever. And it doesn't really have the same impact because all of us include, I mean, the plaintiffs in this case, Graham has expressed it, all are excited and want the investment on the South Side and
Absolutely.
have a flourishing foundation to exist. There's no question about that. However, that being said, having it on the South Side doesn't somehow mean that the only way it benefits the South Side is to have it centered in the park like this, and taking away Cornell and Marquette and Hayes and doing all of those things that are going to create problems. And to go back to the point, when it's theoretically stated in a traffic report or in other things that is 2 years down the road, it doesn't hit anyone thinking about it or living in the area in the same way until you drive it. Once you're there,
right, until you're in there.
Yeah, then it all of a sudden you say, wait a minute, why is this happening? Why are we doing this? And I think Graham's point was particularly good when you think about how bad it's likely going to get a lot worse. And if that's the case, how is that going to affect? I mean, of course we're very concerned about the destruction of the parkland, but as Graham mentions, like, how about the success of the OPs of the presidential center? Is that going to be impacted by the fact that there's going to be these tie-ups and these other just logistical problems that are going to exist, that you avoid so much of that with a more sort of thoughtful plan and thoughtful usage of what are a tremendous investment in the area.
You make a great point. I had read an article that talked about 10 ways to keep attendance up at these presidential libraries, because it said that in most cases, from the opening year of the library to about 2014, they all seen a decline of almost 80%. Every single one of them. George Bush, George H. Bush, Herbert Hoover, Reagan, Clinton. Now, granted, a lot of those may not be in actual cities. Chicago's the third largest city in the country. Right. But to your point, just to get there, you have to, whether you take Stony Island North or whether you take 57 North and you get off and you go east, just to get there, it seems like, it's like they want to create a museum campus south in a sense. But, and I'm not trying, like, I hope the library is successful despite our reservations, right? But it's just like, when you look at the stats, they all decline. So, like, are they really doing all of this for just about a good 3-4 years of excitement? And then after that,
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on this one if that's okay. This goes back, I'm going to keep plugging the plan here because I really want your listeners to go there. Can I say the website? I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely, please.
So there's 2 ways you can get there. The first one is opcwashpark.us. That's it, Obama Presidential Center, washpark.us. You can also use something called Twin Embraces, which is the name of our site, the name of the plan itself. So you can visit twinembraces.com, .org.us, you name it. You can probably make your way there. And pick your favorite flavor. But one of the things here is, so we call this the Obama Presidential Center, and in order to make it relevant in a perpetual way, we've got to give it a place within the city that matters, and we've got to give it functionality that is welcoming and that has meaning on a daily basis, so that it really becomes a focal point of daily life for people. The museum that you might go to once or twice in your life, or maybe if you love it that much, you go there once a year or something, that's not enough to drive the economic development we're looking for. And as you really point out very astutely, Twiz, I mean, the facts are what they are. Typically, these things tend to, get a little dusty pretty fast. So that's part of why the plan that I'm promoting, it ties into that city fabric in a way that's extremely different from the current proposal. There are lots of public features there, whether that be full service library as opposed to the small little library that they're currently planning. It ties in with the arts block that the University of Chicago is building. There's all kinds of public spaces in the parklands. There are convertible areas that turn into open air theaters. We've got a winter garden there, which is like a year-round space that you don't have anywhere else in the city of Chicago. Right off the Green Line, where people can come in a bad storm and still have a pleasant environment to, do a farmer's market or anything. So by doing that, we activate the space, we make it meaningful, and in that way, the message of the Obama Foundation reaches people in a more regular way, and we keep this thing active and meaningful. So that's part of the whole idea. We're doing this to help them out. If I can also talk about the roads real quick, I'm bouncing around here. I just want to return to a couple things that we said that I think are pretty important. The traffic studies, they account for a small, very small uptick in traffic due to the presidential center, but they do not talk at all about economic growth in the community. So which is it? Is there no economic growth, or is there a lot more traffic that isn't being contemplated? That's a major division, and somebody's wrong, because you can't have both of those things at once. They're mutually exclusive. So that's an interesting point. And the other point, this is the point that's near and dear to my heart. I used to live in South Shore, like you do, Twiz, right over there by Crandon.
Okay.
And those were the best years of my life. That community is so beautiful, and the people were so gracious, and I had a ball. What I know, and what anyone who lives south of 67th Street knows, is that those routes through the park that you described, Marquette, Cornell, these are kind of a lifeline. It's a way for us to get downtown in a efficient way, where naturally where the jobs are. It's also a way to get to the university and to Hyde Park, where the hospital, the ER is, where Chipotle is, if you want something like that you can't find just yet in South Shore. By cutting these things off, I don't want to mince words here. I have strong feelings about this. I think it's callous. I think it's insensitive. Some people have gone so far to say it's segregation. It really disturbs me, the indifference to the ways that people conduct their lives and the resources they need. I mean, South Shore is a place that didn't have a grocery store for almost a decade.
Yeah.
This is not a joke. So I'm very passionate about this issue. The Cornell Drive, nobody's going to give it an award for beauty, but
it was necessary though.
It was necessary, yes. And secondly, we have the ability to beautify things without destroying them. To say something's unsightly and just eliminate it, that makes no sense at all.
And I know that these are, in many respects, one could argue, much more practical and important issues. But I will also note that when this park was contemplated, and I have to defer to Graham a little bit too, but in talking with Graham and with Tom Mitchell, who studies these things in detail, the fact is that these roads were specifically created for usage by the community. Olmsted was well known he developed sort of the boulevard system as I understand it, and so these types of roadways were meant for purpose, and in fact the community is using them very consistent with the purposes from which it was built. So to have these important elements and then tied yet to a historic fabric that exists here, we are fortunate in our city, and POP, Protect Our Parks, works to protect these types of issues. But it is when you have an asset like an Olmsted Park, who is also the landscape architect for Central Park and in New York City, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and other parks. But these are unique assets, and a community that has them is really fortunate, and we are indeed fortunate in our city to have a tremendous asset like this, and those historic roads and vistas are part of it. And I'm not saying that overrides everything, but it is certainly, the law recognizes its import, and indeed I think it's a practical nature. The community has embraced those elements of it and utilize it day in and day out. Twiz, I think you're saying that as well when you talk about your usage of Cornell, and many people that we've had the pleasure of talking with about this type of plan talk about Cornell as such an important artery, an important part of their daily lives. And so we would certainly hope that as the rubber literally hits the road here, that there is more outcry and more sort of debate about why are we doing this, because there's still time to do something different. But I do think that's just another element that can be lost in all that. But I do think it's important to recognize it. And I'll also say one other thing about the Olmsted related issues. I'm not aware, and I've talked with others about having an Olmsted related asset like this and have it kind of mauled in the way that it's done. This is highly unusual to have something like this occur. And when you think about its import to the community, its usage, you know, I believe it is the most used Southside park. I mean, to have that kind of occur to it is sad in a lot of ways. Putting aside, you know, whether, you know, we're challenging it under legal grounds, but it's also sad too, and it's very impactful to the community.
You know, Graham had said something very interesting about, like, you know, the museum, about how some people might visit the museum once, maybe twice, you know, things like that. You know, growing up in Chicago, even the suburbs of Chicago, is no secret that the Museum of Science and Industry, the DuSable Museum, these are popular field trip sites for kids. It's kind of like the Obama Library eventually just going to become just another field trip site. And bigger than the transportation issue and, you know, the roads being gutted and all of that, a lot of residents in Woodlawn and South Shore, they're worried about the G word, gentrification. You know, they're worried about, you know, will there be rent caps? Will there be tax caps? What do you guys have to say about that?
Well, I would say firstly that they, that, you know, their concerns are legitimate, and I think we are. I can't speak for Michael, but I'm fairly certain that everybody involved with this is very sympathetic to all of that. It's legitimate. I can't personally claim to be an expert in these matters, and I know there are a lot of people who fought very hard for the current community benefits agreement that was put in place. I also know there's a lot of people who don't feel like that agreement is everything they were looking for. And what I can tell you as an architect is Washington Park as a community, which of course kind of spills over into Inglewood, Fuller Park, Grand Boulevard. There's a lot more available land over there. There's a lot more distressed property over there. And this is everybody who's listening to this podcast is going to roll their eyes because we know how Chicago operates. But if we could get a situation where the mechanisms were in place, I believe it would be much more easy to achieve the great outcome that we all deserve in Washington Park. Because ultimately gentrification comes from a couple things. One, it comes from policy. And secondly, it comes from supply and demand. And if the policies are good, and if the supply and demand is in check, and we can achieve supply and demand being in check by spreading the wealth, spreading the opportunities throughout the community in a holistic way. If those two things are good to go, then we can probably have a great outcome. And you know, I think that gentrification and disparity, or gentrification and disinvestment, are actually very closely related. Because what happens is you get pockets of inflated demand wherever people start to sense that there's, you know, an opportunity. If we could spread that opportunity equitably throughout the city, Chicago's lost 500, 600,000 people since its peak. There's really no reason anybody needs to be displaced or asked to leave or forced to leave.
Yeah, and they're constantly building more and more, you know. More condos and high rises are constantly being built and sprouting up all over the city, you know.
Yep, but at what expense? I mean, if we were lucky to gain population in the last census. So
I saw that it was very small too, wasn't it? Like very small.
Of all of it's embarrassing. Of all the big cities in the country, we fare the worst. And you know, that goes back to policy and a lot of other stuff, which is you know, a huge topic of discussion. But what I can say is, let's assume that the population growth is flat. Every time you build one of those fancy high rises downtown, that takes demand and potential growth away from the south and west sides, or you know, potentially the north side. But my point is, all we're doing is shuffling the deck. And that has environmental consequences because we're wasting resources. And it also robs communities of potential investment, which can bring equity and parity to things. So it's really about policy, in my opinion. But like I say, Washington Park is a great opportunity to do the right thing because we have space to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, I agree with Graham's perspective on that. I will say that in terms, particularly, it is a concern. The gentrification issues and the displacement issues are definitely a concern. I think it certainly was disappointing, that for years, those, really trying to advocate for community benefits agreement were basically kind of stiff-armed in many different ways. I remember attending a hearing in May of 2018 over at City Hall, where the halls were filled with the community benefits advocates, who still at that point in time, after years of discussion, were basically not satisfied in any way. And I agree with Graham too, that I think there are questions about, the plan that was being approved as being sort of like a half, at best, a half loaf. And what I think is important in that is this, when you think about the Jackson Park issues, I would suggest that one problem that's even raised in the suit, but just as you're sort of thinking about it, it's something that was basically, when you think about a private developer, which this in essence is, and saying, I wish to do this in this location, it doesn't really have that community input, if you will, in the same way. If we are able, and Graham's plan, is I think terrific, but I think one of the fundamental points that tries to be conveyed is that it also is desirous of community input and of having the community that is of concern, right? If there is these legitimate concerns of displacement and gentrification, so if you have those individuals and families interested in talking about where the best place is and why it works, it seems like some of those issues can be better addressed versus having something imposed out, from sort of the outside in, if you will. And I certainly think by location, it's going to be of assistance here too, for the reasons that Graham had stated. One of the plaintiffs in the case, Jamie Calvin, has written about a lot of these affordable housing issues in the past and how they have been so badly managed in the city and on the South Side, and these thoughts about urban renewal and how that has been sort of botched by sort of having superimposed, many policies versus sort of working with the communities. And I believe and hope that this issue too, however you wish to, however it's called, whether it's through a community benefits agreement or whether it's called, dealing with the issues of displacement, can be addressed through better involvement with the community and understanding of their needs and how a real sensitive plan can be input. I do think that's missing here, or was missing, and can be. When you improve upon that, I think that will help in addressing these issues as well. Yeah. So whatever it's worth.
I read an opinion piece in the Chicago Sun-Times yesterday by a 20-year Woodlawn resident. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, Liletta Robinson. And she said, that was
beautiful.
Yeah, she said, the louder the drum of jobs and economic opportunity is beaten, the less I'm inclined to believe it. Don't let that projected promise deprive us of our neighborhoods, natural resources, and landmarks. That was powerful to me.
Oh, yeah.
Well, she is, I think, recognizing that there's a better way to go about doing this, and whether it's the simple sort of view of saying, how do you really get economic development in a park itself? I mean, that's one thing, and why, and then taking it separate from that, why can't an area have a beautiful historic park and a beautiful presidential center that actually engages into the community and actually can deal with the true issues of economic development and bettering of the neighborhood? Something like, this is not like you have to recreate the wheel. I mean, as I understand it, the Clinton presidential center, it was located ultimately in an area in Little Rock that was underserved historically, and placed and has helped in growth of that community. Here, there are areas that can, with the clear sort of thought that everyone favors investment on the South Side. Why can't there be more to focus on the best area in order to achieve both protection of the environment and of the parkland that is so that the author of that piece so nicely talks about, and how saddened it is to lose that, and also for what is essentially a false promise of other things that are going to come. But that's unfortunate.
So I still have my Redfin. I still get Redfin notifications just on my phone, and I just look just to do it. Even though we bought this property in 2017, But I noticed a trend with whether it's a home or whether it's a commercial property for sale. The hooking point, the selling point is near the proposed site of the Obama Presidential Library. That's like the hooking point, right? And it's interesting to me because it's kind of like, why is that the hook now? Why it can't be near the lake, which is true? Why it can't be near Lakeshore Drive, which is true? Why it can't be, near University of Chicago Hyde Park, which is true? Everything is centered around the Obama Library and this promise that is going to bring economic explosion to the area. And again, I'm not trying to sound, like a hater or negative or nothing like that, but it's just like, why you can't have both? Like you said, to your point, Chicago is big enough to where you can have both, and it's kind of like they want to fit it into this narrative of, because, Michelle Obama went to school here. She grew up here, South Shore, they had their house in Hyde Park, they went on their first date in Hyde Park. It's like they want to fit it in that area. Whereas like, with Graham's plan, there have been alternative, better suited places to put it where it adds and not subtracts.
Yeah, no, that's Graham's plan. Definitely. I mean, his point as he talks about like do no harm is definitely, engaged when as part of, what you're saying there. But that is such a fair question. It seems so intuitively right to be able to say, we have this asset. I mean, I'm not as eloquent as Graham or as Tom Mitchell is, but you have this special, unique asset protected in various ways, which is a beautiful, the park itself is beautiful. I mean, it is, and it has such beautiful elements to it. Why can that not serve as a further anchor? Why can't that be part of the entirety of the, it's sort of twist what you're saying. Why is that not a part of the Redfin? Why isn't that, within a block of Jackson Park and, the future and a couple blocks from, the building of the OPC? Because there's no practical reason, there's no legal reason, there's nothing that we're aware of that precludes that from happening. And Graham's plan, I think, demonstrates that. There may well be many other ways of going about it, but that is a great example of a plan that takes that all into account and provides the community both of these wonderful assets. And I'll say one other thing. And actually, and Graham mentioned it, but it expands the park. It expands Washington Park. So not only is there more protection for Jackson Park and of course this enhanced presidential center, but it actually enhances Washington Park too. So you get like the maximum benefit, bang for the buck that's being spent.
Well, right. I mean, that $170 million for all this road work, I would challenge anyone in Chicago to tell me what they're getting for their money. Yeah. Honestly, I mean, you do not gain parkland. If you look at my website, I'm going to say it again. On that website is the only place I've seen on the web, unless you dig through some very difficult graphics that are not intuitive at all. It's the only place I know of where you can actually see what's planned. Just have a look at that. Yes, they kill Cornell Drive and buy themselves some square footage there, but then the OPC takes physical land away from the park district, and we have the golf course encroaching on other parts of the park potentially. There's actually a net loss of what I call free and open, just available parkland to do whatever, the kind of place you would fly a kite or take your kids or, toss around a Frisbee or something. I mean, that type of land is in jeopardy in Jackson Park as a result of this. And I, as a taxpayer in a city and a state that have no money, that are closing schools, and I could go on. Why are we blowing $170 million on screwing around with some roads that were perfectly fine? Now, what I did with that money, right? You give an architect a penny, they're gonna turn it into like $1 and spend it, right? So I what I'm proposing in our plan is, if we're gonna spend $170 million, let's do something that actually is good for the people on a daily basis and good for the Obama Center. And that's why I'm proposing a tunnel beneath Washington Park that gets most of that traffic out of there, cleans up those difficult intersections. If you know the street names, Morgan Drive, Rainy, Payne Drive, those intersections are a nightmare, very dangerous. Let's get that all out of there. Let's make mass transit possible on the 55th Street corridor by straightening the route through the tunnel. We can get people to the level 1 trauma center at the university that much quicker, which can save lives. I mean, this is very productive use of money. If we're determined we're going to spend it, we've got to make something out of it.
So where do we go from here? So with that plan that you have, Graham, the tunnel, everything, it sounds beautiful. And again, I'm gonna put the link in the bio so the listeners can see it visually. And then with the litigation still, ongoing, I think one of you mentioned that construction is slated to be about 5 years. So we're looking at maybe 2025, 2026 before this is complete. Where do we go from here?
Well, I'll make a point, which may or may not land with some listeners, but I mean this in all sincerity. I think the legacy of the first Black president in this country is worth as much as you want to throw at it. I don't think there's a dollar value that you can put on this. I think Chicago's got to get this right because this is the chance of a generation or a lifetime. So there's been a little bit of money spent on design. There's obviously a little bit of money spent ripping apart our parkland for no reason. Who cares? Let's start over and get this right. The president deserves it. The community deserves it. Michelle Obama deserves it. And that's what I'm hoping for at this point. I'm hoping that there's a groundswell of people who take a good look now, with open eyes at what's really going on. You can really feel it now. If you go by Jackson Park, I don't care if you live in Lisle or Waukegan, come down to Jackson Park and feel it, because this is not a good feeling, even if it's got the president's name attached to it, as much as we love President Obama. This cannot be right. It simply cannot be right. This is the man who fist bumped Greta Thunberg and talked about the environment. We got our wires crossed here, and Chicago is going to get a black eye from this. So that's what I'm asking for. I'm asking for everybody to come together as a community, for ourselves and for that great legacy of President Obama, and just simply say, stop the press.
I think that there is time to get this right, and that's why we are continuing our efforts. I think about it in the short term and medium term and the kind of long-term goals and long-term sort of like impacts. And certainly in the short term, we recognize that certain of the elements of the park that are important are, many, there have been certainly many trees that have been cut down, but as we talked about before, there's still much to protect, and that is worth the effort. So there is time, and there are, we are working to try and protect those assets. So there is sort of a pathway to doing that, and we certainly think that we think that's consistent with what, putting in Graham's points, I think are good. They're different. I think there are other reasons why, when you think about short-term and long-term goals and impacts, I don't think it's a very good precedent to have had this private development be handled in the way that it's been handled. This is not the last large development that's going to occur in our city, and it's not the last one that's going to challenge public space and public parkland. And I think when Graham alludes to the golf course, I think that's another part of this that might be coming down the pike as well. So when you think about these issues, you do need to think about, one, protecting the physical space, right? That we want to have this improved, and there's time to do it, because if these federal reviews are done properly, it's going to lead to a better result. I certainly believe that. I also believe that by protecting those policies, that other projects and other communities, not just this community, but other communities will also be protected down the road from, having, sort of these types of things occur down the road, because this issue will come up again. So I think it's such an important message I think that to know that this is not over by any stretch, and that having people have their voices heard and their communities saying this, we don't think this is the right thing, and we should maybe think about a different path. I do think there's opportunities for our political leaders to listen to that, and to have a pathway to say, you know what, particularly as Graham correctly knows. I mean, we're operating with thin, with negative budgets and with some, in a pandemic environment. Why aren't we thinking this through in a better way that will enhance the impacted community and long-term enhance, better our policy and how we treat developments and parkland? I do think there's so much to fight for, and there's so much for people to talk about right now, and they just need to be engaged, and we so much would love that. So I certainly believe there is still plenty of opportunities here for protection and for good results for the community.
Absolutely.
If you enjoyed this podcast, I ask for two things. Number one, leave a 5-star review. And number two, pass it on to a friend who may enjoy it as well. And don't forget to subscribe to our other podcast, Mogul Motivation from True Stories Media.